Shalom, this is Yair Davidiy speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. Speaking to you from Jerusalem, and I'm speaking to you on behalf of Brit-Am, Hebrew nations, a movement that finds the lost 10 tribes amongst Western peoples. And now we're about to give an overview of our findings. So from the historical point of view, this is a continuation of a series. And presently we're going to discuss the Scythians. The Scythians were a group of peoples who first arose in the Middle East, then they moved to southern Russia, then they moved to Western Europe. The Angles and the Saxons, the Frisians, different peoples in Western Europe gave rise to West European peoples are descended from the Scythians. From the Scythians also came a portion of the so-called Celtic nations. And we are about to show that the Scythians were descended from those 10 tribes. We have already shown that the Cimmerians, who were related to the Scythians, were also from the 10 tribes, or at least had a portion of the 10 tribes amongst them. When they first appeared, the Cimmerians and the Scythians were the one people confederated, joined together. When they first appeared in the Middle East, and when they were recorded by Assyrians, but the Assyrians recorded their presence and spoke of them. That is the first historical information we have concerning them, these reports of the Assyrians. And the Assyrians were the most powerful nation in the world at that time. The Assyrian Empire stretched over most of the Middle East area and also into Europe. The Assyrian Empire had conquered the land of Israel, and it had exiled 10 out of 12 tribes of the Israelite tribes. It had taken away the 10 northern tribes, 10 tribes from the 12 tribes of Israel. 10 of these tribes, that is the majority of the Israelite nation, they'd taken them away and transported them into different areas of the empire, and there they disappeared. They lost consciousness, they lost awareness of their ancestry. They disappeared from the eyes of history, from the eyes of contemporary reports. But nevertheless, there are indications that they did stay together. They remained as coherent bodies, as cohesive groups, joined groups that were together in one area, even though culturally they assimilated to the ways of the nations around them, and they in effect forgot their origins. They forgot the Israelite origins. We should remember that the time that they were exiled, they had already gone in the ways of the nations around them. From a religious point of view, they were no longer Israelites because they were worshipping idols, and they were copying the customs of the Canaanites, worshipping Canaanite gods, and they spoke a similar language to the Canaanites and taken on Canaanite practices. Because of these sins, these transgressions, they were exiled. God exiled them. And the Almighty Himself said this, that they would forget their origins, because the divine purpose had a plan for them. There was a reason for them to be exiled, and there was a reason for them to forget who they were, because they were destined to go down to the level of the nations, of the Gentiles, of the non-Israelite nations, and then to evolve upwards with them and drag the rest of mankind along with them. And this is what they did overall. So now, getting back to the Scythians, what happened to them? Who were they? Or how do we equate the Scythians with the 10 tribes? So first of all, we have Assyrian records. Suddenly Assyrian records start telling us of the Cimmerians. They tell the Cimmerians were settlers, were colonists of the Assyrians, and then they rebelled against the Assyrians, and the Assyrians fought wars against them. And then we hear, as a part of the Cimmerian Confederation, we hear of the Scythians. Then they were referred to as Ashguzi, or different names, and but they were a part of the Cimmerian Federation. One of the names that they are known by is Isaac Guli, which in effect means the exiles of Isaac. Isaac was one of the forefathers of the Israelite nation. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were the ones who gave rise to the Israelite nations, and it was said, as a blessing in Isaac will your seed be called, as if the name Isaac would be attached to the major portion of the Israelite nation, and this is one of the names we find attached to them. and the different variations of the Scythian names, such as Saka and Isaac Guli and so on, indicate that their name did derive from this term Isaac. We also find the Scythians, when they first appeared, together with the Cimmerians in the region of Manai, that is up around about Azerbaijan of today, in the related area, southwest of the Caspian Sea, present-day Iran, and northwest Iran, and so on, on the foothills of the Caucasian Mountains. This was the area of Manai. It had been prophesied by Amos that this is where the majority of the 10 tribes would go to. This is where we find the Cimmerians and the Scythians when they first appeared. We also find here the Zabatas River, the Sab River, and the Sambatai, which Sambatai gave rise to the legend of the Sambatian River, beyond which the sages of the Talmud said the lost 10 tribes were to be found. And later this name Sambation is also found in southern Russia, together with the Scythians, after the Scythians had moved to southern Russia. First they were in the Middle East, then later on, much later, they moved to southern Russia, and from there they moved to Western Europe. And the name of Sambation seems to have moved with them. And we find parallels between descriptions of the 10 tribes in the Bible and in Talmudic literature with the Scythians. And what is said about the 10 tribes in the Bible and in the Talmud and related sources describes what history tells us. Historical sources tell us about the Scythians. The Scythians are the ones who are doing what the 10 tribes are described as doing. And this confirms our identification of the Scythians with the 10 tribes. And remember that from the Scythians eventually were to emerge the Angles and the Saxons, the Frisians and related peoples of Western Europe. So at all events, whilst the Scythians were still in the Middle East after they had first appeared, they rebelled against the Assyrians like the Cimmerians had done. And after rebelling against them, they became separated. They were separate. They separated out from the Cimmerians, one could say. They made peace with the Assyrians. They joined the Assyrians and became allies of the Assyrian Empire, protected the Assyrian Empire, and somehow or other they graduated to take over in a de facto sense. That is, not officially, but unofficially, in practice, they managed to take control of the Assyrian Empire. They did this for more than 20 years, and they were the ones who had control over it. And whilst all this was going on, there remained the kingdom of Judah. Remember, there were 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 tribes of Israel had come out of Egypt. They had been united under King Saul, and then King David, and then King Solomon. When King Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took over. Rehoboam was not satisfactory to all of the Israelite tribes. 10 of the tribes rebelled against him, and they set up their own kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, under King Jeroboam. And after a couple of centuries, this kingdom of Israel, which comprised the majority of the Israelite nation, it comprised 10 tribes, was taken away by the Assyrians. But meanwhile, the kingdom of Judah remained. The kingdom of Judah consisted of the Jews, of the ancestors of the Jewish people, and they consist of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, Levites, and minority representatives of the other tribes, and they too had to submit to the Assyrian rule, but they remained where they were. They were not to be exiled by the Assyrians, but later on they were exiled by the Babylonians. But after being exiled by the Babylonians, after 70 years, a portion of them returned and re-established the kingdom. And also, even though they were exiled, they retained their consciousness. They retained the consciousness of who they were. They remained Jews. This had been prophesied by Jacob regarding Judah. He said the sept, the symbol, Shevet, in Hebrew, the symbol of being a tribe, would always remain with Judah. Judah would always be recognizable, and this is what happened. Judah remained recognizable as an Israelite tribe, as the Israelite tribe. So before they were taken away by the Babylonians, whilst they were still in the time of the Assyrians, they they had not been conquered by the Assyrians. Sennacherib, in effect, the Assyrian king had attempted to conquer them, and he had taken a portion of them away, and he had besieged Jerusalem, and then an angel came down and wiped out 185,000 of his soldiers, and so he'd abandoned it. So, and after that, the kings, the rulers of Judah, reached an arrangement with the Assyrians, whilst they acknowledged the overlordship of Assyria, but they remained in their places. And so eventually we come to King Josiah, the son of Ammon. He became the king of Judah. He threw off the Assyrian yoke. He asserted his independence of the Assyrians. And he established colonies in neighbouring regions, such as the Philistines. The Philistines were the rivals of the Israelites. They lived to the southwest of Judah, the regions of Ashkelon, Ekron, Gaza. All those areas were Philistines. And so he probably conquered those regions. At the least he established colonies there. He also established colonies in the north, in Megiddo, the former region of the 10 tribes. And also we find a stone pillar with an inscription of acknowledging his suzerainty in Beth-Jan. And also the Talmud tells us that King Josiah sent the prophet Jeremiah to the 10 tribes to bring them back. A small portion of them did return, but after the death of King Josiah, they went back to their places of exile. An attempt had been made, but it was unsuccessful. So this is what we're told about King Josiah. And what do we find about the Scythians? The Scythians had they had taken control to some degree of the Assyrian Empire. They set their centre up in Beth-Jan, in the same region where we find an inscription confirming King Josiah as a suzerain, as a ruler. There the Scythians set up their centre to rule over the whole of the Assyrian Empire to the degree that they ruled over it. Also they attacked the Philistines, and they made raids on Egypt, but they attacked the Philistines in the same way as King Josiah had done. And we find archaeological remains of the Scythians having been throughout all that region at that time, the time of King Josiah. And the Scythians were in that region. After towards the end of the reign of King Josiah, the Scythians began to leave, and they fought wars. King Josiah was killed fighting the Egyptians on behalf of the Scythians. And so we see that in effect what the Scythians were doing was the same thing as the Bible describes the lost 10 tribes as doing. They had come back, so the Scythians. So it says that the sources say a small portion of the Israelites did come back and did attempt to make to re-establish themselves, but it was unsuccessful. So we see a portion of the Scythians having been in that region, and the Scythians having done the same things as King Josiah had done, and not only that, but setting up their centre in the very place where he had established his authority. So we see very clear signs of there having been an interreaction between them. The Scythians are in fact fulfilling the role of the 10 tribes. Eventually, the Assyrians reasserted themselves. They took control, renewed control of the empire, or they attempted to do so. The Medes and the Babylonians rebelled against them, attacked them. The Scythians continued for a while to act as allies of the Assyrians, but at the last minute changed their sides, and they helped the Medes and the Babylonians in destroying the Assyrian cities. They helped, they seem to have done, according to different authorities. For instance, the British archaeologist Gad attributes the major role in the destruction of Assyria to the Scythians, rather to the Medes and Babylonians. At all events, after the downfall of the Assyrian Empire, the Medes invited the Scythian leaders to a feast, got them all drunk, and then massacred them. After that, the Medes and the Babylonians divided the former Assyrian Empire between them, and progressively they began to drive the Scythians out. And so the Scythians from then began to, in stages, move to the north, move into southern Russia, which from then on was known as Scythia, and that is where they established their new bases. And this whole process of these actions which they had done in destroying the Assyrian cities is also attributed to Israelites. But we know that the Scythians had done it. So this too confirms equation of the Scythians with having been Israelites, or at least having had Israelites in their confederations. And we have other evidence which confirms this. We have sociological evidence and historical evidence, and the martial qualities of the Scythians were parallel to those of the Israelites, and different things, different points which confirm this identification, overlapping of identity that we find between the Scythians and the 10 tribes. And as we said, the Scythians had been driven out of the Middle East into southern Russia, which became known as Scythia. Pliny, a Roman historian, much later, in about 77 CE, he said that originally the Scythians had been called Arami. Before being called Scythians or Sakai or the other names given to them, they had been known as Arami. Arami means Syrian, but it was a name applied by foreigners and also by Israelites. In Deuteronomy 26, the Israelites once a year were told to bring their first fruits and to say, a wandering Arami, a wandering Syrian, it is translated as, a wandering Arami was my father. And we find the Judeans, Judean mercenaries and so on, described as Arami by the Persians. And so Arami was a term that could be applied to anyone in the general Syrian Israelite area. So, and we are told by Pliny that this was the original name. This was the name originally applied to the Scythians. In other words, the Scythians were identified as people coming from the Israelite region. So this too confirms it. We also know that the Scythians had certain customs that remind us of the Israelites, one of them being that they did not eat swine, they did not eat pigs, they abhorred them. Also, the artwork of the Scythians is similar to that, not similar, it is an exact reproduction, according to art historians, an exact relocation, reapplication, one could say, of Israelite and Phoenician artwork, meaning that according to the historian, to the art experts, it must have been done by artisans from Israel and from the Syrian area. Also, many of the Scythian names bore the names, many of the Scythian tribes and clans bore the names of Israelite tribes or tribal clans, and also we know that elite groups in the Tanais, in the region, in an area known as Dan, actually known, it was a Scythian city known as Dan, on the Don River, and in this city, and the elite rulers, Scythian groups, worshipped a deity whom they identified with Joseph. Joseph, the patriarch of the Hebrew people and the head of the ancestor of the foremost tribes amongst the 10 tribes. They were Ephraim and Manasseh, were 2 sons of Joseph, and these were the foremost tribes amongst the 10 tribes. And as we said, all of these different proofs taken together indicate very strongly that the Scythians were indeed Israelites. We also find that after the Scythians moved to the west, a small group of them remained behind. There was an offshoot from them that remained behind. These became the Khazars. The Khazars later converted to Judaism, and they had traditions that they were from the lost 10 tribes, and they had Israelite customs, and a lot of evidence shows that the Khazars were indeed from the 10 tribes. So what applies to the Khazars also should apply to the main body. And taken all of these points of evidence together, along with additional evidence, and evidence of other groups associated with them, and not only that, but the biblical proofs saying that the lost 10 tribes would eventually be, towards the end times, be in amongst the Western peoples, doing the things that Western peoples, especially the British and American peoples, are doing. And so all of these proofs taken together show that the lost 10 tribes are in those regions, and lost 10 tribes now are to be found amongst Western nations. The English, the Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish, and the people of Northern Ireland are all from the 10 tribes. So are the people of the USA, of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and so too in Switzerland, France, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. All of those nations are where the lost 10 tribes are to be found. We are not saying that everyone amongst those people is descended from Israelites. We were saying that is where the lost 10 tribes were to be found, their descendants are to be found. That is where they gave historical expression to themselves, according to how the Bible had predicted they would do so. And that is where the lost 10 tribes are to be searched for, and that is where we have to give our message over to tell the people in those regions that they are descended from Israelites. Thank you.